Good morning, students. First, let me offer an apology for missing last week's podcast on homelessness. This was for several reasons, some practical, but mostly it was mental. Homelessness is one of those subjects where, as an individual, as well as part of a collective society, I feel like I have no control. This podcast may be one of the ways I can gain some control by spreading some thoughts, knowledge, questions about certain topics, including homelessness. But overall, dealing with the fact that people are homeless in the world, almost over anything else, really shines a light on the privileged position we mostly are in. Without a support network of friends and family, we are all only a lost job and a couple of pay packets away from not having a roof over our heads. We're all vulnerable to it, and you only have to watch The Pursuit of Happiness with Will and Jaden Smith to see how ordinary people decline into homelessness and struggle to get out once they're in. So sorry for missing that week. Today's meandering thoughts are focused around this week's topic of mental health. What is mental health, and who does it affect? Well, let me summarise one point of view by explaining the start of my day, Monday the 11th of May. I was getting out of bed, making a cup of tea, and thinking about making this week's podcast, researching it, writing down notes or a script, recording it, finding clips, editing it together, releasing it to the world to hear, writing on our classroom thread to tell you that it was done and where you can listen to it. All in all, about 8 hours of work in front of me, perhaps give or take. I thought two things that immediately and completely snapped away all of my motivation in an instant. One, what's the point? And two, why should I be listened to? Who am I to talk about mental health? Fluctuations in one's mental health can strike at any time, and who does it affect? Everyone. Well, I realised that I couldn't answer those two questions, and I was stood over stewed tea, locked in my thoughts. Eventually, a small idea bubbled to the surface that brought a half smile to my face. That of the irony of having a bad mental health day stopping me from making a podcast episode about mental health. Christopher Hitchens used to say, when asked whether or not we have free will,
well, rather, when the question is put, is there free will, I say, yeah, I think there's free will, we have free will, we have no choice.
The simple irony and incompatibility of two opposing ideas, like that, or like my predicament this Monday morning, is my kind of amphetamine. So let's begin. According to the Mental Health Foundation, if you're in good mental health, you can 1. Make the most of your potential. 2. Cope with life. 3. Play a full part in your family, workplace, community, and amongst friends. Some people call mental health emotional health or well-being, and it is just as important as good physical health. Mental health is everyone's business. We all have times when we feel down or stressed or frightened. Most of the time those feelings pass, but sometimes they develop into a more serious problem, and that could happen to any one of us. At best, this could be coping with stress from external pressures, such as school, or a job, or a change in family situation. Sometimes one has a physical predisposition or a susceptibility to different states of mental health that can be triggered by external events. At worst, mental health is a direct result of physical changes in your body, such as an inability to regulate levels of dopamine or serotonin in your brain, meaning that you have little direct control over your feelings. This is why it's important to understand mental health, what can affect it, who is susceptible, what can be done about it, and most importantly, understand that mental health is important enough to talk about. It should be taken seriously. And the first and possibly hardest step that you can take is to talk to somebody. In 1995, Stephen Fry disappeared from his life in London, when, at the time of performing in the West End play Cellmates, he hit rock bottom with his mental health. He says he would have committed suicide had he not had the option of just disappearing.
There's concern for the actor Stephen Fry, who unexpectedly left the cast of a West End play 3 days after it opened and hasn't been seen since Monday. The play's author said Stephen Fry was in a state of emotional turmoil due to overwork, but his parents say they're not anxious about his disappearance because he has a great zest for life.
I was around his flat off Jermyn Street, and we're having a drink, and he said, "Have you seen this article in the Evening Standard?" And it was the most cruel piece, just a general think piece, an opinion piece about who is this guy, why does he think he's so good, he's smug, there's nothing particularly clever about him, I don't find him funny. That, I think, was what really tipped him over the edge. So I did see him very, very low, and it was only a few days later that the reviews came out for Cellmates, and that was the end of it.
I think that's one of those moments where he ceased to become the driver of his own vehicle, as it were. And people often report under situations of great stress, report this kind of feeling of disconnection from their own actions. I woke up and I found myself, they use the phrase waking up. Instead of I went there, they go, I found myself there.
Found myself in Hamburg, and I saw these rows of, newspaper headlines and tears for pride type thing. They all are worried that I've committed suicide. That's the awful thing, isn't it? I can't believe I made people worry so much. When you feel you can't go on, it's not just a phrase, it's a reality. I could not go on. And I would have killed myself if I didn't have the option of disappearing.
Stephen Fry is a child of a time where feelings were not discussed, and grew up with the antiquated notion of the British stiff upper lip. The just get over it mentality, coupled with Stephen Fry's undiagnosed bipolar disorder, led him down a dark and difficult path. 1995 was only 25 years ago. Were that younger man living in 2020, would he have gone through the same experience? We are aware more than ever of the importance of mental well-being and seeking help, yet it is still something that is ignored and stigmatised against. A 2017 survey of 2,000 workers commissioned by the Mental Health Foundation revealed that 38% of British workers would not talk openly about a mental health problem for fear it would affect their job prospects or job security. Are places of employment doing enough to create a safe and trusting environment to welcome that kind of honesty from staff members yet? Whose responsibility is it? Should businesses even care? About half of the workers asked in the survey said they were more likely to make up an excuse, such as stomachache or back problems, for absence if they needed to take time off work for mental health reasons. And 11% of those surveyed had been victims of abuse at work as a direct result of a mental health issue. The survey also polled 1,000 managers and found that almost a quarter said there is no established protocol or procedure to follow if staff have concerns about their mental health. Now, the Equalities Act in 2010 protects those with mental health problems from discrimination, and since the Mental Health Foundation survey, guidelines have been published by the MHF for employers, including a checklist on how to transform workplaces into mentally friendly environments. Though this sort of deeply ingrained attitude takes time and effort to change. I, for one, am pleased to be living in a world where attitudes are changing. Another person you may have heard of who has been affected by mental health issues is a writer and actor called Robert Webb. He has written a book I'll recommend now called How Not to Be a Boy. Webb writes a memoir which, amongst other things, discusses his mental health through the lens of gender expectation. If you've ever heard the stereotype that women are better at talking through their emotions than men, and men are rubbish at it, then this book sheds some light on that stereotype.
Sometimes I think masculinity is a crisis in that it's something that you recover from. Now, let me be clear, I'm not down on men. I think men can be magnificent, men can be farty humans like all the other humans, and we can behave disgracefully, and and people are people. I don't think being male is some innately fallen state, but I think masculinity, gender, the stuff that you put on top of sex difference, the stuff that gives sex meaning, is largely made up and harmful often to both boys and girls. And it starts in childhood, and that's why I approach the subject through a memoir, because that's where it all kicks off. But masculinity, I mean, in that passage I was talking about, what is it? Is it, a love of leather wallets, having medallions? It's difficult to talk about it without this, importing this sort of steam tanker full of bullshit from the last century. And, I look at the poem If by Rudyard Kipling, where he talks about, is a famous version of masculinity. I'm very fond of the poem. And he's talking about grace under pressure and stoicism and physical courage. And that's all fine. It's just that I can't help noticing that I've seen women exhibit these qualities all my life. And indeed, if you've been in the same room as a woman giving birth, then you're very quickly cured of the idea that grace under pressure or physical courage are exclusively male virtues. Kipling would disagree, but then so would a lot of people in 1909.
The chapter, Boys Don't Cry, gives rise to an interesting question. Why are boys shamed for crying? Shaming is exactly what is happening when the phrase boys don't cry or big boys don't cry is used. In that phrase, try replacing boys with girls and don't cry with don't play with Lego. Now replace boys with women and don't cry with don't study STEM subjects. Feeling angry yet? I hope so. What are the long-term effects of this? Boys Don't Cry is the toxic soil in which to grow an emotionally unavailable man who, at best, will find it difficult to make meaningful connections with other people, and, at worst, will express any negative emotions as anger. If recognising the problem with that isn't a good start to developing strong mental health in children, then I'm not sure what is. This is why I recommend the book How Not to Be a Boy by Robert Webb to you. If only to get you to question the basic assumptions that there are inherent differences between people based on their gender, and take pause and question someone the next time you hear them use a lazy justification for aggressive physical behaviour like boys will be boys. That is just one colour in the mental health spectrum, and there are so many more that affect it. I'll finish today by saying that mental well-being is a constantly evolving beast, and building a robust mental health to deal with the big things and the insignificant things is a difficult and arduous process. Everyone is different, and nothing is inconsequential. You may bounce back from a setback, while someone else may feel weighed down by it for a long time. Your mental health doesn't always stay the same. It can change as circumstances change, and as you move through different stages in your life. Whatever the circumstances, establish and seek comfort in the network around you, and remember that everyone is going through something. You're not alone, and there are people who can and will sympathise with you, and will help you. And, like Thor, Odin's son, god of thunder, even if you have failed an important task, it doesn't mean you're not worthy.
Come on, we gotta go. 3, 2...
Oh, wait!